shame. You have felt it too. It's that emotion when you want to tuck yourself into a tight ball, roll into a dark corner, and disappear. You are the bad little girl or boy who is unworthy, unlovable, and cast out. Shame feels like you've done something very, very wrong. So wrong that your self esteem withers and you see yourself as seriously flawed. And Jung said that shame is a soul eating emotion. Hi, everyone. We're here doing Take Action Challenge 10. We are talking about vulnerability and shame. I have James with me, who I'll introduce in just a moment. So I just read that article, that little spiel from an article called 12 Strategies for Overcoming Shame. And we'll talk a little bit about vulnerability and shame in this challenge. So let's just define vulnerability. It just refers to inability the inability to withstand the effects of a hostile environment. A window of vulnerability is a time frame within which defensive measures are diminished, compromised, and lacking. So to be vulnerable means to be susceptible to physical or emotional harm or attack. So it's kind of like opening yourself up. And then shame is an unpleasant, self conscious emotion typically associated with a negative evaluation of the self, withdrawal of motivations, and feelings of distress, exposure, mistrust, powerlessness, and worthlessness. So, Take Action Challenge 10 is going to our challenge is to talk to someone, open up, and be vulnerable. So you can do that with a friend, with your significant other, with a therapist, I guess, whoever you want to open up to, and just see how they respond. So, mm, number one is to open up. Number two is to have an outside look of how they respond. So I thought that for this challenge, do a recording with myself and James so I could open up a little bit to him and also get to hear his thoughts and feelings on vulnerability and on shame. So, hello, James.
How you doing, Steve? Uh, yeah, I guess I'll just introduce myself here. Yeah, most of you probably know me a little bit from the Take Action challenges here on Facebook, and or some of you I know from in person. And yeah, I'm living in Nova Scotia now, and I'm really enjoying doing the challenges. Just getting a lot of value out of them, and I'm really excited about this challenge today. Talking about shame and vulnerability. To be honest, like vulnerability is something I always hear people saying you should be more vulnerable and things, but I'm never really clear on what that means exactly. Like it's a little bit fuzzy to me what that means. So I think this is really valuable today, like actually getting a clearer picture of what vulnerability looks like and like what kind of actions it looks like in the real world. And I think I was listening to the podcast that Steve sent me on shame and vulnerability, and I think one thing that really stood out from that episode is they were talking about one guy who was having a really hard time making eye contact. So they did an exercise where they just made eye contact with each other for 60 seconds, and they talked about the vulnerability of doing that exercise. And I think that's something that really resonates with me. Like it's just kind of leaving yourself open, like really feeling that connection with someone through eye contact. And that's one time when I feel really vulnerable. Like I'm opening myself up to other people, and I could ultimately get hurt just from starting to open up to someone. And really just letting them in to see some of myself at a deeper level. So I guess that's just one aspect of what I think about vulnerability. And as far as shame, I think one phrase that really resonated with me is feeling like I'm not good enough, which is a problem for myself in some areas, like where when I'm like applying for a job or something, and I'm like, I'm sure I'm not qualified for the job or something. So I think that's something that definitely resonates with me as well.
Thanks for sharing that, James. Yeah, I agree with some of those assertions, and the eye contact is actually a really good one because you can think of vulnerability both from a psychological and a physical thing, really, because to be vulnerable is to open yourself up to attack. So, thinking of that in a physical or in a war sense, to be vulnerable would be to put your head up, to open up the part of your body. And we often think of defensive crouch is when you got your head down and you're not making eye contact and you're kind of closed off. So that also, I think, with vulnerability, opening up, we also have some psychological things that we're hiding, some parts of our personality that we don't want anyone to see, some things we're ashamed of opening up and being vulnerable about. So, uh, learning to put ourselves out there. And we've done this in the groups, myself and James, as well as others, through groups over the years, have really slowly started to open ourselves up, I guess, and talking about some of the things that we have been a little bit reluctant to talk about with a lot of people. I know for myself, one that I thought of, I was talking to Jennifer a little bit earlier, and we talked about my relationship with my son. There is some vulnerability and shame there because he is also very quiet. So it takes a lot for the two of us to really open up to each other. So I think I could, and I do carry some shame about that. I think I should have a closer relationship with my son, and I think I could take some deeper steps to be vulnerable and to open up and to tell him, So I'm thinking that is one that resonated with me that I feel a little shame about, and that I plan on being a little bit more vulnerable and opening up to him. So there's lots of other areas I feel shame and vulnerability as well, but that is one that I thought that I'd talk about. James.
Well, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. It's always hard to be vulnerable, especially when you're talking about your close relationships and things. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and that it definitely resonates with me too. I mean, it's those are some of the things that myself I can feel shame about too. Just with those personal relationships where you really want to be more vulnerable and kind of create those deep relationships, but yeah, it can be hard when you get stuck in some old like patterns sometimes too. So so yeah, I don't know. I appreciate you sharing that, and I think yeah, I don't know. I think it's just really encouraging to hear you're really going to work on that, and you're going to take the courage to be vulnerable and um, continue to build that relationship with your son, because I know it's like really an important. I can tell it's a really important relationship for you, and I guess now you want me to share something. Is that correct or?
If you would like to share something, if there's something that you'd like to be a little bit vulnerable with.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't really know what I want to share. Yeah, it's just mainly, I guess what I was talked about earlier, just that feeling in some situations that like I'm not good enough for this. Like whether uh, I was like writing an article recently for something, and I just had all the thoughts going through my head like I'm sure I'm not doing a good enough job at this. So yeah,
Yeah.
probably won't get accepted. Or whether like I guess like dating, as I mentioned in a previous action challenge, is something where I get a lot of those feelings of shame. I guess that I didn't even really realize it was shame until we did this exercise. Like and I watched the podcast, just feeling like yeah, I'm not good enough. They won't be interested, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's something that's tough for me. Like that's where I have that feeling of shame, where um, it's something it's an area where like I think in some areas I've been doing better at being more vulnerable, but that's still an area where I think like the shame overruns the vulnerability, and I just like kind of I just let it control me a bit too much. So yeah, I think that's one area where it's tough for me. Just I'd really like to be more vulnerable in that area. Just talking to like women that I'm interested in, and just being open to feeling some shame and not closing off so much in that area.
Yeah, no, that's a really good one, James. Actually, I think I can definitely relate to that one. I'm not in a situation right now where I'm dating or nothing, but I know the shame involved in feeling that you don't measure up or that you're not good enough. I definitely felt that and still feel it in many ways. Um, in different relationships actually, and sometimes, like you said, taking down those walls and being vulnerable is not always easy. It's a process, and one of the things about it is that you share that process with other people, with some trusted friend, a trusted confidant, a mentor, or anything like that. It makes it much much easier. It releases that shame, I think, when you start to talk about it. So I'm glad we could get together, James, and share some of our shame, some of the things that we feel a bit of shame around, and share some of our vulnerabilities. It's really good. I think this challenge was a success, and I'll let you uh, bring up any conclusions you would like to talk about shame and vulnerability. Again, before I hand it over to James, the challenge, everyone, is to open up to someone. It don't have to be anything big. It can be open up to the smallest thing that you might feel a little bit vulnerable about. It could be, like James was saying earlier, just making that bit of eye contact, or sitting down with your partner and just trying to open up about something that you may be holding in. Or something that may have caused you shame, and you can do this at your own pro, pro, on your own progress. Do it on your own time. You don't have to come out and tell your deepest, darkest secret to your next door neighbor or nothing like that. You can open up as you want at your own time to someone that you trust and feel confident with. And myself and James have been friends for a number of years now. I feel very trusting and confident to open up to him. So thanks for that, James. And I'll let you wrap it up yourself and talk to any final thoughts you have on shame and vulnerability.
I think my number one thought is probably just that being vulnerable really does help in building closer relationships. Like I think that's something I really learned from Steve and a few members of our in-person group over the past few years. Is that whenever someone gets vulnerable and kind of puts aside their shame a little bit, it really makes me feel closer to that those people, and kind of respect them more, and that they're like so trusting of myself to share personal things about themselves. So yeah, so that's my number one takeaway. Just that I think if we want to build close relationships, you really have to have the courage to be more vulnerable um, and open up to the people we care about.
Fabulous, James. Couldn't have said it any better. And like you said, opening up and courage is the way to go. Thanks again. Take action challenge number 10. Thanks, James. And to everyone out there, please try to open up to a friend or family member or whoever you would like to. Try to be a little bit more vulnerable and share some comments or messages about this video or about your vulnerability, your shame. And just, of course, number two, see how that person responds. I'd like to thank James again and looking forward to the next challenge. Thank you, James.
Thanks.